All right, the second recipe we're gonna do is sweet potato muffins. So it's just a standard muffin recipe, but I'm gonna toss a couple cups of sweet potato in it. So to start, we're gonna start the same way we did with the bread. Do 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And again, it does not have to be perfect. We can rebalance a little bit at the end. 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Then we're going to add a 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. Because these are not meant to be super healthy. 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Make sure you do baking powder, not baking soda. Otherwise, this is going to taste like Pop Rocks and not muffin. Just a little extra there. And then we're going to do about a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. You can do a little more or a little less. I think the recipe that I am using as a base is a little afraid of over salting things, and that's okay. And then to that, we're going to add a few spices. We're going to do cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and ginger, your basic pumpkin pie spices. Make sure not to go too far with the cloves. Cloves are very overpowering, so we're still only going to do about 1/4 to 1/2 of a teaspoon for our muffins. And about the same amount of nutmeg as you did the cloves. Maybe a little more. And then you can go a little bit more crazy with the ground ginger. I'm going to do at least 1/2 teaspoon of that. And then cinnamon, maybe 3/4 of a teaspoon to a full teaspoon. We want this to be pretty cinnamoned up, pretty well seasoned, and then we'll go ahead and whisk that. Unfortunately, we are not going to use tiny whisks this time because we don't need to. So we want to make sure this is super well combined. We don't want any chunks of flour. We definitely don't want any chunks of baking powder. As you can see here, my baking powder is a little old, so there can sometimes be chunks in there. So we want to try to get as many of those out as we can. There were also chunks of sugar as well. So we want this to be as incorporated as we can possibly get it before we add any wet stuff to it. Because with muffins, you don't want to have very much gluten involved. So the more you whisk it here, the less you have to do so once you add wet ingredients. And we're going to do the same thing as we did with the bread. We're going to add a little well into the center. We'll add our wet ingredients. So now we're going to go ahead and add our wet ingredients. So I've got about 2 cups-ish of sweet potato that I'm going to go ahead and add in there. We want these to be really solidly sweet potato forward, so honestly the more the merrier, so long as your consistency is right at the end. We're going to add to that about a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla flavoring. About a tablespoon of molasses. Again, this is going to be a pretty sweet recipe, so we don't have to worry too much about going low on this. And brown sugar with sweet potato is about the best combination you can think of. Then we'll add 3/4 of a cup of milk. This is just our dry milk that I went ahead and added water to. And then finally, 2 eggs. These came from a farm, and we'll put them to good use. Right, and we'll whisk that to combine. And remember, don't over whisk this. We don't want to have super gluten development. We want to keep these really nice and soft. And adding less flour to sweet potato ratio is going to help that. But also the less we can mix, the better. And we want this to end up looking a lot like a pancake dough, just a little thicker than your standard pancake dough. So just on the Yeah, honestly, about like this. On the dry side of pancake, the very, very wet side of bread. But not quite a cake batter either. So we'll just make sure to work all the rest of this flour in there. But this is about right for what we're doing. And it can be a little chunky at this point. For muffins, it's all going to work itself together in the oven. The way we normally oil our muffin tins, I just use olive oil. If you have like a spray, cook spray on hand, that works really well too. But I usually just toss a little bit of olive oil in there, take a paper towel, and make sure to rub it on all the surfaces in each cup. And that usually serves me pretty well. Sometimes it sticks a little bit, but generally this is all you really need to do. We're going to go ahead and spoon out our dough. We want each of these to be about 3/4 full. A little more is okay. It's just going to spill over the top a little bit, but everybody likes a really nice muffin top, so it's fine. All right, so now that we've got these spooned out, we're going to go ahead and put them in the oven. I've got it set for about 350. And these are probably going to take 15 to 20 minutes or so. The way I bake, I usually just check it every 10 minutes, and then once it gets close, every 5 minutes. Go ahead and get these in the oven, and we'll come back to you when they're done. And so the final recipe we're going to do is sweet potato pancakes. This is something I've been workshopping for the last year or so, and I think it's finally about ready to share. So this one actually starts with sweet potatoes. So I have about a pound or 2 cups of sweet potato in our bowl left over from what we've been working out of. So it's about equal parts sweet potato to flour, whichever flour you use. So since I've got about 2 cups of sweet potato, I'm going to add about 2 cups of flour, maybe 1.5. You can always add more flour later, like I said. So go a little light on your flour before you go overboard with it. To that, we're going to add about 1/2 cup of sugar. Once again, just to add a little bit of sweetness. It doesn't need to be perfect. Actually, let's go more like 1/3 cup of sugar. It doesn't need to be super sweet because you're probably going to be adding sweeteners to your pancakes. And then again, about a tablespoon of molasses. That just makes sure that the sugar that we add in here is brown sugar. For all of these recipes, if you just sub the molasses and the sugar with brown sugar, you're going to be just fine. We'll add about maybe a teaspoon of salt. This is going to add, again, more of a buttery taste. It's going to allow your taste buds to have more than just levels of sweet. So you'll taste a little bit of savory in there. We're going to add probably 1.5 teaspoons of our baking powder. We've got 1 cup of milk that we'll also add. Then we'll add our spice mixture again, and it's the same thing that we've been using: cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and nutmeg. All in about the same proportions we added for the muffins, maybe a little lighter on the spices. So I would say probably 1/2 teaspoon each of the ginger and the cinnamon, and 1/4 teaspoon each of the nutmeg and the cloves. And then we'll add another 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla. As with any baked good, a little bit of vanilla is going to work wonders on that. and then maybe a tablespoon of oil. This is just going to add a little bit of fat to our mix. Butter would also be really acceptable here. Pancakes do really well with butter. And we'll grab a whisk and get this mixed up. We want this to be a pancake batter, so we will add more milk as necessary going through this. We want this to be just barely cohesive, and I mean that quite literally. So we'll add either water or milk, doesn't really matter, until we get it to about the consistency we want. And I would add it in quarter or half cups depending on where you're at. So just a little bit of water to get this to flow. Ideally, you don't want it to be able to hold any of the peaks that you're making. So like you want it to start running down like that. That's a really good sign that you're about there. So this is about the consistency we want, maybe a little bit wetter, just a tad. If you haven't noticed, I don't usually measure when I cook, but in total, when you're adding your milk, go ahead and do more like a cup and a half to the proportions that we've done, and I think you'll end up right where you want to be first time around. Now that we've made our pancake batter, this goes just the way every other normal pancake goes. I've greased up a pan. I used olive oil, but butter is perfectly fine here. And we're gonna make just standard small silver dollar-esque pancakes. If you go too big with these, they tend to fall apart. So I keep them about the same diameter as my spatula just to make it easy on myself. But if you find a better way to do it, then I will defer to your judgment. And these aren't very liquidy, so sometimes it's better to come back and pat them out just a little bit as they cook so that they're not super thick. As soon as you start seeing little bubbles climbing up into the middle of the pancake, they're ready to flip. And these ones can be a little delicate, but so long as you go quick to get under them, they do pretty well. You can see they don't have the same coloration as a traditional pancake. They tend to look more like a fried item. That's mostly because I use olive oil. I usually give them a couple minutes on the other side, and then they're usually ready to go. I do like them to have a little bit of crispiness on one side. It gives a different textural feel, and honestly, with sweet potato and brown sugar and all of that, having a little bit of char actually does really well with your taste palette. So our muffins look about done, so we're going to go ahead and take them out, let them cool, and then we can see how we did. So they've been in for about 20 minutes, about what I expected them to be in for. As you can see, they don't darken up too much on the top. That's mostly because I didn't brush them down with butter or anything. But they are very nice and firm and fully cooked throughout. They should have a nice little brown streak on the sides, and we'll see that in a couple minutes once they cook. As you can see, the oil worked wonders. These aren't sticking whatsoever. Came out a little dense for your standard muffin, but that's because there's a lot of potato in these. So they would end up a little dense. But coloration turned out really well. They smell amazing. I'm sure you can smell them through your screen. So hopefully we'll get to taste these, and they should taste pretty solid. That's that. We've got all three of our recipes done. So got, again, to recap, sweet potato pancakes. These are a pretty simple, easy way, fan favorite, to use your sweet potato. Got sweet potato muffins, a really new take on just a standard muffin recipe. And then if you just want to hide it completely, you can toss it in some rolls. So as you can see, nobody would ever be able to tell that there's half a pound of sweet potato in these. So I used about 3 pounds of sweet potato today with these recipes. So I only have another 1,497 to go. So hope you'll tune in whenever we harvest those. Have a good one. Bye.